Well, I want to welcome everybody. This is a good group here today. And we do have some people online. Matter of fact, we have someone who was here and now is way up north, and she's joined us. Ilona, she's joined us. So that's very, very nice. So we are, well, I can't say we're nationwide. We're East Coast wide. All right. I'm Michael Schachter, the president of the Carolina Nature Coalition, and our mission is to raise public awareness of environmental issues and environmental social justice by engaging citizens like yourself in meaningful community action. I want to start by thanking Public Radio East and New Bern Now for having us on their calendar and for publicizing it. And of course, I want to thank the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of New Bern for providing this venue here. We can both have people here enjoying it and also people online. And especially I want to thank our secretary, Tom Shoup, as our main technical person, who's always there to help us out. Thank you. And Connie Casey, our media manager, who provided the refreshments and does much of our publicity. She provided the goodies here. And I will be remiss, she would tell me I'd be remiss if I don't tell you, for people online especially, but for people here, our website has a donate button. And if you like what we do, you can donate online, or if you're here, there is a donation box over there. And that's what we live by. We live by individual donations. We don't get any funding from big corporations or little corporations. Now I'd like to invite Ed Toth to introduce our speaker. Ed?
Thank you, Michael. He caught my attention because I thought he said donut button, but that didn't work though. But I've known Stan for a decade now with the Unitarian Universal Fellowship here, and we've become very good friends. And Stan has quite a background. He grew up in eastern North Carolina. He went to NC State, Vietnam War veteran, has spent about 35 years in social service. And then was it last year, I think you retired, or was it this year? When did your paycheck stop? Oh, okay. Anyways, my background's in wildlife and land use planning, land use management. And so I've always had a big interest in the history of the changing landscapes of the United States. What we see today is nothing like it was when the first Europeans came here. The Native Americans were active land managers, covered a large area, and had a very high population. When Henry Hudson went up the river, up the Hudson River, he could see just on both sides, as far as he could see, was corn maize growing across the landscape, and it's the same down here. And so I had a big interest, and I know Stan has done a lot of research into Native American history and land use. So Stan, please.
Thank you, Ed. Hello, Ilona. Long time. I fell down some steps. That's why I've got all this on. First of all, I'd like to welcome you. This is a very auspicious day. It's National Turtle Day. I learned from my calendar, I didn't know that, but I'm wearing my turtle that I got on the Six Nations Reserve back in the 80s up in Canada. I have been working on Native American history for quite a while now. And let me say right now that American Indian is not a discredited term in North Carolina because the Indian people here have worked so hard over so long to be recognized as Indian people. And so it's not a discredited term. It may be in some areas, but when I traveled around Ontario, I saw signs on rocks, "This is Indian country," and things like that. So I think it's kind of been blown out of proportion. But I have been called an expert on Native American history, but I am not an expert. I may be the world's greatest student, but I don't think I even qualify there. That would have to be somebody who had been studying the history since 1977, as I have, pretty much continuously, but was also a Native American. And they're doing a lot of research now into their own history. It's really great. My only concern is it's almost all online. And I'm kind of a Luddite, and I think one day this is all going to go blank, and then that history, will be lost. But anyway, I thought that one thing, when you study it so long, one word may send you off in a tangent, but we've got kind of a concentrated thing today, and it's not Pamlico River, which is up there on the screen or will be. But just any one thing can send me off on a tangent. So if I do that, somebody raise their hand. Also, feel free to ask me some questions, either during or after. But if you go on for too long, I might raise my hand for you. So I thought that we would begin by looking at, first of all, I just want to orient you to the environment here, the native environment, because North Carolina has been described as the most, or North and South Carolina, as the most ethnically diverse area in the United States, except California. Of course, I'm talking about pre-Columbian Carolina and California. There's so many different ethnic groups that were here. And even today, we have the largest Native American population of any state east of the Mississippi. So I'll tell you more about the present day people. That's my true love, where I've really done my research. But if you look at this big map of North Carolina that I've got up here, and you come down the coast, you're in the Algonquian territory. Starts up around the Great Lakes, goes out the Great Plains, out as far even as California, and then comes down the East Coast in the area of estuaries, bays, things like that. Then right behind them, the furthest spot they go to in North Carolina is Pamlico County. That's my home county, which is right next door here. I gave a presentation down there one time, and I suggested that we have a big billboard at the county line stating, "Welcome to Pamlico County, home of the furthest southeastern extension of the Algonquian languages." But it didn't go over very well. We got a good laugh. And then immediately east of that, where we are now, are a couple of mystery tribes, the Neuse and the Coree, Neuse and Core. You've probably heard a lot of times that the Tuscarora lived here. Well, they didn't, technically. They lived upriver. Where the river narrows, then the Tuscarora. And the Tuscarora are one of 3 Iroquoian tribes that came down from the New York area. Tuscarora here, Meherrin a little bit further north, and Nottoway up in Virginia. Past that, you got the Siouans that came down basically also from the Great Lakes. And west of them, the Cherokee that are there today. So it's very diverse, and all kinds of variations within those big things. And that's one of my great loves. Who are the people, where they came from, what language did they speak, and stuff like that. But we'll avoid that today. So let's take a look at these slides. Help. Oh, I got it. Because I'm going to use these as like talking points. Now, this river, does it say Pamlico River? These slides were put together pandemic, for a specific purpose. I gave a talk up at the Beaufort County, or the Bath Historic Site, and I wanted them to know about the groups that were in that county. So I'm going to show you some pictures of the people that are there today. But if I were just talking in general about North Carolina, I would begin with the Lumbee, and we'll see them too. That's the largest tribe by far. But this will bring us to our topic. But because it wasn't organized for, oops, I shouldn't have said I was a Luddite. Because I didn't organize these slides for this particular thing, I'm just going to move through some. These are the John White drawings. Just curious, how many people here are familiar or have heard of the John White drawings? Good, thank you. Yeah, I think they should be taught in public school, but they're not very well known. But these were the first English explorers came here in the 1580s, and they had this artist among them who happened to be their captain. And he painted everything. He painted people, he painted butterflies, he painted plants. He was like the mission photographer. And they're just incredibly important. But I'm not going to dwell on each one. Well, here we go. This is the one I wanted to really talk about. This is a shot of one of their villages, and this brings us to our topic today, because I see it basically as agriculture and then outside the farmlands. This is a village which is up on Pamlico River, which is just north of here. It's called the village of Sokotaak, which means river bend people. And pull up my bench now. This gives us some insight into the agricultural techniques. For instance, to the right, you can see cornfields. And there's one in front that's kind of small, there's one in the middle that's kind of middle, and there's one in the back that's tallest. And they planted that way. And I just learned today in reading some early stuff that the corn species or something had been, what would be the term, anyway, altered over centuries so that they became ripe at different times. So they had consecutive corn crops. I've been wondering how corn would even exist with all the cutworms and things that we have even today, how people with no insecticides could even have anything to eat when they get to that point. But apparently they did. My first thought about this was that the green corn ceremony was a thing that was all over the Southeast. And I thought probably they harvested the corn when it was green and ate it then, because if they left it up there, the insects would devour it. And I found out that that is not correct. The green corn ceremony inaugurates the harvest system, and it's for a good harvest. So the time follows where the insects and everything could eat all they wanted to, and then they had the harvest. But you'll also notice in the back field there's a little dome thing, and there's a teenager in there, if this were happening, and his job is to keep a look on the fields, especially at night, and to come out hollering and probably shaking rattles and beating drums if something comes in, of which there were many things. Bears especially. Yeah. How's this? Oh God, yeah. Bears especially, and bears can just ruin a cornfield. Even today, we've got so many bears around here. But other things is this interesting. This may be too much of a sideline, but this morning I was looking at the illustrations that were actually published in England, and they're etched because they couldn't publish watercolors in 1580s or 90s. So they had professionals that turned them into etchings. This guy was debris. And in a lot of cases, he wasn't satisfied with John White's. He wanted to gussy them up. For instance, one roof on a temple that John White painted, he turned into something that looks like a metallic tin roof, and it's just terrible. And unfortunately, that gets published all the time because it's easy. But I was looking at his version of this, and I noticed he's got some things that do not appear on this. Down in the lower left, over the small building, there's an empty field there, I think. And in here, it's a field of tobacco, upawak, they called it. They were very respectful about upawak and really considered it a sacred thing. They offered it to their gods. They did smoke a heck of a lot of it. And even today, Indian people today are terrible tobacco smokers. I'm sure they've slacked up a little bit in the recent years, but when I first started going down there in 78, it just seemed like every young person I saw was smoking a cigarette. And I talked to a very elderly lady, and she said, Miss Maddie, she said, if I ain't got any tobacco, I'll smoke, I'll chew rabbit tobacco. I'll smoke that little vine that grows up the side of a pine tree. And she named a couple of other substitutes that she would, smoke or eat or chew. But they're also famous for being excellent tobacco farmers. the best in the whole place. So it's just been continued from prehistoric times right up to the present time. How did they clean these or clear these fields? It was kind of rough. It looks a little neater than some of the descriptions I've had here because, they didn't have saws. To make their canoes, they had to burn around the edge and then ship that away and burn some more. It was a laborious process to get it to fall. And then they turned it into a dugout by setting fires on the top and going down and making it very thin. But they were skilled at this. And they never worried about time. They had all the time in the world and they used it to do things very well. For instance, tanning of hides, that was an art. The hides would be tanned. They'd be of the texture of textiles because they were so well cured and that's one of their arts. I'm also interested in architecture of the native people. I'm not going to get into that here, but this is one of those things where I could go off on a tangent. But this is one of the two types. They were either spread out villages or they were encircled, fortified villages like this. And that building in the back that's got kind of a pointed roof is the one that Mr. Debris here wanted to gussy up and put something that looked like it was on top of a building in an English country house or something. It's an outrage. I'm still mad at him. Okay, thank you. That's my love topic. They started with putting poles in the ground, but they had warmed them so they could be bent over and tied together in arches. We had a sweat lodge here. We still do in a way, but for years, back about 10 years ago, we had a sweat lodge that met every month. And we built our sweat lodge in the same way. We warmed the poles in the fire, and then you could bend them very carefully, rubbing on them. It was very interesting. And that's the way they made their houses. And then they were covered with cattail mats, which they could roll up, or with panels of cedar bark that they removed in the spring when the sap was high. They could cut around and just slip them off. Here's another of my crackpot theories. This is the Nature Conservancy, but the pileated woodpecker went extinct here. There's a relative that used to be around here. I remember seeing them. I haven't seen one in a long time. But why did the pileated go extinct? And my little theory, I haven't run it by anybody yet, is that the native people would strip the bark from the cedars, and there were innumerable cedars just all over the place. And then I would think that the cedars would die. So there was a ready quantity of dead trees for the pileated to dig their homes in. I think their nesting thing just disappeared because the Europeans would cut down the whole tree, use every bit of it, there wouldn't be anything left, and the pileated disappeared. I'm going to try to track that down. Okay. Now hunting is another thing, and just showing some general pictures here. Some of the hunting techniques don't really sound that admirable because you've probably all heard of the thing out in the plains where they ran the entire buffalo herd off a cliff and hundreds crashed to the bottom and were killed, whereas did they really need hundreds? But that was especially before they got the horse and they could, chase the buffalo and run beside them and fire the arrows into them. But in their defense, they really did use every single piece of an animal that they killed. And they had ceremonies for it too. They offered tobacco to it. Before they even went out, they had ceremonies asking the animals to sacrifice themselves. So it wasn't this blam, blam, thank you, sir. It was a ceremonial thing and very important. And everything was utilized from the sinews to the hides to everything. The bones were cooked and just everything. Anybody got any questions? Put them in stews in the marrow to cook the marrow out of them. I don't know how you do that, but I think if you boil it long enough, the marrow comes out and as part of the stew. Okay. All right. Yeah. Neck bones. Yeah, you're right. And these people are from the Roanoke tribe, which is Algonquian tribe right up from us. And the same people extended into Pamlico County and Bay River. I don't think that any of the Bay River people were painted by John White, but some historians do think so. It's kind of a turf thing. Pamlico County historian insisted one night that all these paintings were painted in Pamlico County. You know, people take ownership of it. But most people think that probably the majority were painted opposite Bath or even at Bath, which is a creek. But that's something we'll probably never know. The English were pretty good at recording native names of everything. It's kind of impressive. Horn was Kupawak, I think. I might be conflating that with Kupawar. But they recorded all of these names, the Algonquian names for the cardinal, Algonquian names for plants, and of course the Upawak, the English called tobacco. Just tons of things like that. And some linguists have done studies of them. This is one of their medicine people. And an elderly man. But some people have said that John White gussied up his paintings and made them look too Greek, because there's one scene of a dance where they just don't look like the stereotype of the non-European people dancing. But when you see this photograph, I think this shows that, you know, he painted what he saw. This is the tomb of their chiefs, which getting back to their skill at working hides and things like this, they lapped, as I said, the skeletons in deer skins that were so carefully cured. I can't think of the correct word there for the deer skins, that they fitted the skins to the bones just like they had looked before. Very odd. Now we're just going to run through the Roanoke people. And I should say that these, the people on Roanoke Island, there are three groups: the Roanoke, the Hatteras, and then at Lake Mattamuskeet, they're the Mattamuskeets. These are people of today, obviously. And they are people who have been recognized and have considered themselves as African Americans. But they, as Ms. Cooper said at a family reunion I went to, we think it's important that we acknowledge and respect this part of our heritage as well. And the fact is that the family names were the very families that were given a reservation like in 1712, and then they sold it to the surrounding people sort of out of necessity, and they were probably pressured. And so the local people, non-Indian people, knew that they were descended from the reservation and continued to call them Indians right up to the Civil War. But so many people had left and fled into the interior, Indians, that they found their spouses everywhere. So, but they're still there, and they're very proud of both their heritages. This is the chief, Ms. Marilyn Berry. This is one of their elders, old photograph. Let's see. Now, what did they raise in their fields? I kind of skimmed over that. They had corn, of course, but they also raised not elders, pumpkins, thinking of two things at once, beans. What is that word? Can't even read it. But after they had been used, these fields, for a long time, and this kind of gets back to our present topic, land management, they would move on, and the fields were left fallow. And I'm not sure how long they would go before they would leave them fallow, but they were persistent. So when the colonists came in and they moved into the interior about 1730, they would start, when they were selling and buying land, a lot of times the deeds would refer to an old field. Like Mr. Jones's property begins at the corner, the southwest corner of an old field and extends down to a creek and an old cedar tree. But you see this term old field all over. So when they came in, there was evidence everywhere of the people that had lived there. And there actually were people still living there, but they were hidden away, Indian people, Native people, hidden away in the most inaccessible parts of their territory. These are the Mattamuskeet people now. I could say something about this man, Mr. Berry, but I'm not going to because we're not talking about all of that. But the guy on the left is a direct descendant of one of the 4 chiefs of the Mattamuskeet who signed the papers for the reservation at Lake Mattamuskeet. And that's his granddaughter. Moving on through this. Now we're getting into the Lumbee. I first went there in 1977, and I've been back innumerable times now. They're the largest tribe in North Carolina, hitting on 49,000 people. The Cherokee are the best known up in the mountains. They're about, I think, maybe 10,000, maybe 15,000, but this group is much larger. So the Cherokee, I think, is doing everything they can to keep the Lumbee from getting recognized because they see them as a threat to their benefits. Not very fraternal. Here's a baptism scene in the Lumbee River. It's really swampy down there and low, but they would clear a little area out. There's a wonderful photograph, early photograph of a log cabin with a man standing in the door, and all around is corn. So it's a log cabin in the middle of a little corn garden, really, and then behind that are the tall trees. And everybody was hunting. Back to Mr. Debris, who tried to do the metal roof on top of that building. One thing he added, and I was amused when I got in here and looked at these pictures again, he added Indian people in the village itself shooting deer. But that was just something he added. But the deer would not come into the village. In fact, one person wrote that every living thing that came anywhere near the village was promptly killed and eaten. They were very efficient at making sure they had something to eat, whatever it was, but not as efficient as we were when we got there. Any questions? Lumbee or, yeah.
Lumbee, okay.
Yeah, thanks. It's of all the communities today, and there's like 12 in North Carolina, little known to other people, but all of them are located in swampy areas or either border hills, but they're remote. They were remote. Today they're paved. You know, swamps have been drained. It's really kind of hard to comprehend. But the Lumbee are in Robeson County, which adjoins South Carolina, and Lumberton is the present town. And they have their political things. One person wrote that the typical Native American village in North America, in Eastern North America, consists of a small church and a community of people around it, maybe, 80, maybe 100. But the Lumbee consists of 100 of those small communities. And a lot of them are known by the names of the predominant family. The most common name is Locklear. It's Professor Dahl, he's one of their historians, or was. But land is so important to the Native people today. And they have big families. They have nothing, it was nothing unusual for the longest time to have 10 children in a family. So you can imagine how it gets when it comes time to divide up granddaddy and grandmother's property. There's just millions of people there that have a claim to it, but it's usually done amicably. But a lot of people have left the Native communities and gone north. The Lumbee especially went to Philadelphia. The Haliwa-Saponi went to Philadelphia. The Lumbee went to Baltimore and established a little Indian world within the city there. where people from back home were there, and they went back home as often as they could. So, and this, I feel like I'm getting away from our topic, but it's hard not to. This is right here in New Bern, the 2010 powwow. Did anybody go to that? The 2010 was New Bern's 300th anniversary, 17, 18, 19, 20. Yeah. And they actually had a powwow there, which turned out to be fantastic. Really, a lot of people were hoping it would go on, but this was just a one-time thing, and it was really great. One of the tribes is the Meherrin tribe. They're up around Ahoskie. And this is some of their pictures. But one Indian guy was looking at my photographs, and he said, "We're pretty people." And I had to agree. You know, I think they're beautiful people. I think everybody's beautiful. Everybody's beautiful. That's Wayne. He was a special friend of mine, dedicated to the history of the Meherrin people. Would call me up at 11:30 p.m. and say, "Where did you get that reference to such and so?" And I said, "I'll try to find out and get it back to you." But he was texting probably about Meherrin history and had an accident and then died about 6 months later. Tremendous, tremendous loss for the tribe. In this case, they invited Iroquois people from New York to come down and teach about the Great Law, which is an Iroquois thing involving Handsome Lake, their prophet. So back to the use and eating everything. Some of you have probably seen oyster shell mounds on the coasts. We went to one in northern Georgia, I think, that was just incredible. The whole island was oyster shells. And then it had grown up with oaks and everything like that. So it looked like a complete island of nothing but shells, and it probably was. The biggest one that we've had here was in Carteret County on Harker's Island. And at one end of the island, there was this huge mound of oyster shells. But the state could not leave it alone. And so they excavated it and used it for road building back before paved roads. And now there's not even a trace of it. It's a shame it wasn't preserved. But this would come in when it was oyster season. The people had their areas, and I was describing them a while ago, the Algonquins, the Iroquoians, the Nusiac-and-Coree, the Siouans, the Cherokee. But there weren't boundaries or anything that you would have to pass through a checkpoint. You just went where you wanted to go, and then you could trade with the people there. So there was lots of interaction between them. And when the oysters were ready, people came from miles and miles and miles from other areas completely to come and eat oysters. But they could be quite treacherous too. This is my cover picture here. I love this picture. It's gotten a little dark over the years. But he's a member of the Haliwa-Saponi tribe, which is in Halifax and Warren counties, up by the Virginia border. They've been leaders in the traditional stuff, recovering Eastern ways of making regalia and stuff, things like that. And there's their famous chief, Chief W.R. Richardson. I was about to say something and it went right out of my head. But this guy is holding the drum staff. This is at the funeral for Faith Hedgepeth. She was a UNC student who got murdered one night, and it's been 8 or 9 years now, and they still haven't found anybody. They haven't charged anybody. They said they had somebody, but nothing came of it. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, thank you. Not the oysters so much. But, you know, we tend to idealize them. It's probably out of guilt of the way they were treated. And we think, you know, they did everything so much better than what we do. And they were spiritual, and all people all around the world are spiritual for sure. But right north on Pamlico River, the Machapunga people, which was an Algonquian subgroup, invited the Pamlico people from up around Little Washington today, another Algonquian subgroup, to come and feast. They had had some bad times and they wanted to make up and start over. So the Pamlico came down and they were in a lodge. They were feasting, and the Machapunga dancers were entertaining everybody, and everybody was getting along great. And then they doused the lights and slaughtered all the Pamlico people right there. So treachery was a respected and admired technique, and they used some of that too on the Europeans when they decided we've had enough, we're getting rid of these people in 1712, and the Tuscarora War started. So the people, the accounts said they were beside us as if our best friends, and we don't know why they did this without any warning, but it was a tradition of if you want to win, you got to do it fast, and that's one way they did it. The guy on the left is from the Pueblos out in New Mexico, and she is from the Haliwa-Saponi. A lot of people, Indian people from all around the country, come to North Carolina to the powwows and everything. This is something that happens. Each community does a powwow, and here's where you really see Native American cooking. And I'm telling you right now, nobody can cook pound cake like Native American elderly ladies. I've been given a lot of it, and it is superb. I'm thinking of one lady in particular. I think I got her picture in here somewhere. And this is the senior citizens. I went up there and did a presentation to them and just showed them dozens and dozens, because the picture aspect of my book has really gotten out of control. I was originally thought I would do 12 pictures, evenly divided between male and female, age, spread apart, and it just took off. So now I'm trying to figure out how to do this. Instead of having a 30-page footnote-filled chapter, I'm going to a photo book with a concise introduction for each tribal people. That's the end. I thought I had more. Okay. So, yeah.
Do you know what type of tribe is in Arapaho?
I'm from Pamlico County. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Also, you mentioned the religion, type of religion that was being worshipped.
Yeah. I was reading the accounts of the explorers in the 1580s about the religion, and they said they have their own religion, but it's false, and we're hoping that we can persuade them of the true path. They really didn't have any respect for it. But Arapaho, one theory is it was named for a horse, racehorse, but there were no Arapaho Indian people here in Pamlico County. They're out in the plains where the Cheyenne and the Arapaho and the Sioux and all of those people, all of those are names that were given to them by other people. But the Arapaho name is kind of a mystery. Yeah. There are definitely people in that area that are descended from Indians, but as one lady told me, yeah, they're from Indians, but they won't own it. So it's kind of funny, Mike, yeah, Fred.
A point of interest. A point of interest.
Yeah, good.
In Brooklyn, and the Indians lived on the beach, and that they had these rabbit type little animals that were called coons, and they did their fishing there and they lived there. And then when the Dutch came in to that section, it came from coons to Coney, and that's how Coney
Island. Oh yeah,
got its name.
Yeah, that is interesting.
They were the Cherokee.
Yeah, yeah. This is totally off thing, but when I was in school, I had a teacher from New York, and she said, "I want everybody to tell me your name so I can learn it." She said, "What's your name?" And I said, "Staten Island." And she said, "Staten Island? That's where I'm from." I'm proud of that.
Speaking of language,
Yeah.
how did the different Indians communicate through other languages? Because I know that several of them spoke different languages.
They did. Yeah, they did. Usually in an area, there was kind of a lingua franca that was predominantly, that was understood at least by some. In the East, it was Tuscarora because they were the largest tribe. But the other languages were totally unrelated to Tuscarora. So to learn it for trade purposes, really, they had to really, really work at it because it's just a totally different language. But often several people, several explorers and early writers, are we running out of time, Mike?
No,
Okay, said, I mean, I could go on for hours.
don't keep going.
I think I will. No, they said that the language of each group differs greatly from the ones right next to them. And that wasn't always the case, but it was frequently the case. The Siouans would be next to the Iroquoians, the Algonquins would be next to the whatever. So it was just really complicated.
Stan,
Hmm?
is it on? Okay, I'm sorry. I have to hold it next to me. Okay. Kind of three things related to land use, because again, from the north, like you said, every 10 years they'd move.
Yeah.
So if you had a
Approximately.
lot of people in a landscape, what you're going to find out, it's not the forest primeval. It's going to be a forest that has maybe 10% is going to be field, 10% on and on until you get to 100. And then the other two things is the amount of wood that was used by Native Americans for whatever cooking ceremonies, whatever. There was a amount taken off the landscape. And the final point is they were active fire managers of the landscape. That's why the red-cockaded woodpecker exists,
Still here.
is because they live in live trees, not in dead trees. And they said at one time you could ride a horse from the East Coast all the way over to the Mississippi because it was such open landscape.
I don't know about that, but that's interesting. Yeah. Actually, there's quite a few things stating that the Indians, well, this is in the early colonial period, that the Indians lived in a wilderness that no white person could even get in, but they lived in complete amity with us, the Europeans. But there were plenty of swamps and things left around like that. Interesting. Thank you. Thank you, Ed. Yeah.
Thank you. And Stan, could you comment just on, I'm kind of curious if you can say anything. I'm not sure how well it's understood, but the sort of the spiritual connection that the Native Americans have to the land, you know, like kind of to the topic we're talking tonight. I'm just kind of curious if anything you can say about that.
Yeah. Okay. So it's just a generally spiritual culture. And it is now too. Today, they're very devout, mainly Baptists, some Methodists and fewer holiness, but they're devout Christians. And you saw the baptism scene in the river. I came upon that and I went down and I introduced myself, and the minister said that you can take pictures, but don't take pictures of any of the ladies when they get out of the water because their clothes will be clinging to them. So I did not. And that photo attracts a lot of attention when people see it. Several people have asked me to open the Lumbee chapter with that picture. I might do that. But there wasn't any separation of their spirituality. They began each day, and we're talking pre-contact now. They began each day with prayers. When the sun came up, they would scatter the alcohol. Where's that? Scatter the tobacco. Some kind of Freudian slip there, and pray and chant. I have a recording. I'm also a collector of tribal music all the way around the world, everywhere, and I have a recording of one of the Plains tribes that was made early. And in the morning, someone rides a horse slowly through the village, singing a chant of a prayer chant. No instruments, no rattles, no drums or anything. It's so beautiful. It just goes on and on as they go around the village. And then everything that they endeavored to do, every new thing, whether it was warfare or trade or going down to eat oysters or whatever else, they asked for blessings. And, you know, they used the sage to purify. We did that in the lodge. Sage is a wonderful thing. So everything was just totally permeated, and the land was the most sacred thing of all. And today, I'm telling you, they have really held on to that. Sometimes it gets confused with stereotypes, because there's a stereotype that a lady up in Alamance County told me, that's where the Occaneechi-Saponi live, that she was told when she was little that she couldn't say that she was an Indian because Indians could not own land. That's a stereotype about all Indians live on reservations. And the stereotypes just go on and on. In teepees, speak Indian languages. And, but you know, land is so big, it's so big, and you do everything you can to hang on to your land. Yes, ma'am.
The Indians were the first people here in the North, in
Mhm.
North America.
Mhm.
Were they all over the world?
All over the Americas, or?
Yes, the Americas.
Yeah, it's incredible how they came down, mainly through the land when the water was low. They came down from Alaska and came down, and there are people now, the Navajo and the Apache are really distantly related to people in Siberia. So it kind of tells you, but it's so funny, they came from Siberia to the Southwest desert and they thrived there. So yeah. Yeah, it was connected. Yeah. It broke apart. Yeah. There's some Eskimos, a discredited term now, Inuit people on St. Lawrence Island off of Alaska, which speak the Siberian version of Inuit language. And Inuit's a different category. Like I say, I can go off on tangents. They're not really American Indians. They are Inuit, but they're first Americans. So it gets complicated.
First Nation.
Yeah.
Stan, are you going to talk about any of the items that you brought tonight?
Oh, yeah. Thank you. I knew I forgot something. I always bring artifacts. You want to, yeah. And then sometimes I forget I've got them. But I've been collecting artifacts around the world. If anybody's been in my house lately, they know it's chock full of books and artifacts. But I like to bring these because it kind of gives a feeling. The turtle rattle there, that's Lumbee. And Ed and I were talking, he asked if any of these were authentic, used by the Indian people. And these are all revival or sold for sale, made for sale and stuff like that. But the ones that were used are quite valuable. And then this long thing here, can you pick that up, Terry? This is the most recent thing I got. I got it in Michigan, but it's from the Northwest coast, the totem pole people. And it's the frontlet for the wolf dance. Yeah, when I came into a room and I saw that all the way on the other side of the room, I went straight over there and I left with it. Yeah. And then oh yeah, this right here is a Cherokee basket, and that is a traditional thing that never died out. A lot of things died out when they that thing is full of rocks too. You're amazingly strong. But a lot of things died out when they became Christians. They wore clothes. You saw they didn't wear many clothes. And they adopted the English language because down where the Lumbee and the Haliwa-Saponi and the Kahari and the Waccamaw-Siouan and the Occaneechi-Saponi, people came from all over the place. All those different languages came together. And so they didn't organize as a new tribe. They organized as communities and spoke English. But it's different. It's their own kind of English. So this right here is made out of gourds. This is a kind of a new development. What kind of animal does that represent? A mouse or a rat, yeah. And the Cherokee have just gone wild making these masks, which is great because they're a lot less expensive than the wooden masks, which I have a wooden one here. I don't know if you can hold that up, Terry. Yeah. Pretty realistic. They're called booger masks. I don't know where that came from. Yeah. And then a friend of mine moved to Michigan back in the 80s, and I started visiting up there. And the first thing I wanted to go to was into Ontario to the Six Nations Reserve, because when the Tuscarora left, but they didn't all go up there, fled after the Tuscarora War, they went to Ontario and New York, upstate New York and Ontario. And so this straw mask here is an example of, they call those the bushy heads. And when they have ceremonies, and I've got a representative of the ceremonial mask, teenage boys would put these on and run through the village, making grunting sounds and doing a kind of a bizarre dance and to let everybody know that there was going to be a ceremony. I've got several of those. And then these pieces here they were sold as tourist art, but I think probably they're powwow art. Yeah. One's a pipe, and one's got a horse head on the end, and a hoof on the other. Yeah. So I've seen the same items in museums that were actually collected, in the late 1800s, and they're quite a lot more accurate, more detailed than this, but I like those a lot. And then, Terry, you want to try to pick up the hair on this next carving is on the left side. It's been trying to fall off. So if it falls off, we'll pretend like we don't want to embarrass the mask, because it's very interesting. Now, this is a false face mask, and they were made by men. It was a male ceremony, but one of the women at the Six Nations Reserve, Ms. Longboat, who usually makes bushy heads, said she wanted to make one just to see if she could do it, and she did make it, and I bought it from her. But this is, there was a great film, and I've got it somewhere, but I can't find it. It's on VHS, of the false face ceremony. But I ordered it from Canadian Broadcasting System, and it shows how there was an elderly man, and he asked for the healing ceremony, and they came in. They always crouch very low, and but the Iroquois have a very conservative group that follows this religion closely, and they did not like that it was put out for the world to see, and so Canadian Broadcasting System took it off. I still have mine, but I can't find it. Maybe it's, maybe the gods have removed it. Yes, ma'am. Yeah.
South Dakota.
Uh-huh.
Have you done any study of the Indians there? I've made friends with lots of Indians. I think they're the Sioux.
Yeah, they're the Sioux. There's a reservation up in the north around a lake. I think it's Traverse Lake on South Dakota. And we had family who still live here. I haven't seen them in a couple of years, but Cliff was a member of that tribe, and he came here and presented to the Unitarian Church. He called it One Native's Journey, of his journey through, going to the military and everything like that. And I would see him over and over at the powwows. But yeah, that's a reservation. It's one of the federal reservations. And of course, there are all kinds of indigenous native people up in that area. And they've been treated badly by the surrounding non-Indian people. And there's poverty struck, but they still have a great sense of pride and keep the old traditions straight and everything. Yeah. I appreciate these questions.
Speaking of reservations,
Mhm.
I tried to look before this meeting, but I couldn't find out. Are there, in fact, any reservations, say, east of 95?
There were in the colonial era. There was a reservation at Matamesquite. The people I first showed you there were they're descendants of them. And then there was one at not Roanoke, but the Chowan Indians up around present-day Edenton had a reservation. Another group off to the east had a reservation, and then the Meherrin had a reservation. And then the Tuscarora, who didn't join in the war, had a reservation, and they were given a guy who watched out for their interests, made sure they weren't being abused or cheated by anybody, and they were able to hang on to that land until they decided to sell it in the 1800s. There's still some descendants living around there. That's in Bertie County. But the other ones were just given this land and said, this is where you live. And they went on it. And then wasn't long, they had to, their whole way of life was totally disrupted, and they had to start selling. And they were probably pressured to, the routine, you build up a debt at the company store, and the only way you can pay it off, how it goes, it's been repeated a million times. And so they lost their reservation land. But in most cases, they moved nearby into a deeper swamp, and the descendants are still there. So, but there were reservations, but there are no reservations now. And the people like the Lumbee, they do not want to be on a reservation. They want to own their own lands. No government is going to tell them what to do or tell them who they are. And the Cherokee are not going to tell them who they are either, because they're extremely proud. And they say, we know who we are, whether we get federal recognition or not. We know who we are.
So the Lumbees have not been recognized.
They were actually recognized in 1950, but our friends, the Cherokee, intervened, and so it was said, nothing in this recognition will make them eligible for federal services. So they are the only tribe in the United States that has been recognized by the federal government that gets no help from them. But they've learned how to get help from the government through education and health and everything like that. But they're not a recognized tribe, and it really burns them up. Yeah.
Help me out.
It-
I might be wrong. What Chief Crazy Horse said, how could anybody own the land that they're going to eventually be buried under? Was that a Chief
That sounds like
Crazy
a
Horse
true
quote?
thing. Yeah. Yeah. How can you own the land that was given by the Great Spirit? You know, it's nobody's to own. And yeah, you're going to be buried in it. So yeah, very good point.
Hi, that bear mask, I guess it's a mask, just
Yeah.
really
We
fascinates
didn't
me.
show that one, did we?
Could you show that, please?
Yeah. Like I say, the Cherokee have said, man, we love making these gourd masks. This is Papa Bear. I've got the mama bear and I've got a baby bear too. Mama bear has got some like beads and things on, just sexual stereotyping, but anyway, smaller. Yeah.
Did the bear have significance? I'm sorry.
Oh,
did the
yeah.
Bear have a special significance
Oh, yeah.
to the?
Everywhere.
Okay.
All over the United States, the bear has significance.
Now these masks are what they do now for sale, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't think that they're using these masks in any of their dances or anything. But this basket here is, I bought this back in the 60s, I think, when I went up to, the late 60s, the basket here, yeah. And it's beautifully made. Well, there's a guy who is more into this than I am. He's also a non-Indian person, but Wesley White is his name. He wound up marrying a Cherokee lady, and he gave me her last name. And I said, well, I bought a mask by someone named Little John back in the 60s. And it turned out to be her mother. Well, they sent me this not very subtle thing about, you know, my wife doesn't have a basket by her mother. You know, of course, and he said, of course, it's your basket. But what I did was I took it out in the yard and took a very excellent picture of it and enlarged it to like an 8x10 and sent it to him. He never responded, but I love that little basket. It's so beautifully made. And one more thing, Terry. Yeah, that rattle. These really appealed to me. Originally, they were turtle shell rattles, but the Iroquois have made them out of cow horns. You know, so it's very adaptable culture. It never stayed stagnant. They take in what they wanted. They took in what they wanted from the Europeans and accepted the religion and made it their own. And when something as good as a cow horn came along, they started using those. So I said, I want to say one other thing. Yeah. No, go ahead. I'm not.
Oh.
I think in one of your photographs, there was a female chief. Am I
Yeah.
right? So is she elected? Is she selected? Is it linear? How
Yeah.
does a woman get to be chief?
Oh, yeah. Oh, women are very important in the Native American society. Some of them were maternally organized, some of the tribes, and some were not. But and they did have kind of rigid separation of things that women did and things that men did, but they were very valued. And today, I used to go, I don't do this as much now, but I used to go down a long lane to a farmhouse and tell some people that were on the porch what I was doing and ask if I could take photographs or talk to them about the history. They'd always go get Mama. If she wasn't out there, they weren't going to do anything until Mama, said grace over it. That's another thing they would say. But Marilyn Berry is the chief, the elected chief. And there's no continuation. There's no family that has it. But the Waccamaw Siouan down, obviously next to Lake Waccamaw, had a female chief too. She was the daughter of their first elected chief. And so it passed to her. I can't think of any other female chiefs, but the women are highly valued and they play an important role in the government and everything else. There's so much less of the junk that goes on elsewhere.
Dan, in regards to living in balance with nature,
Yeah.
that implies that we can live in balance with nature. But balance with nature, sometimes maybe nature would win. And where I'm going with this is the theory has been, I've heard a theory that actually what kept the Native Americans or the American Indians in balance with nature was that a lot of them just starved to death and or nature won a lot. Can you comment on that?
I can't. I haven't heard that. I mean, it's a lot of stories between the Atlantic and the Pacific and the North and the South. But I don't know. Yeah. I know when the explorers came in, they saw abandoned villages in North Carolina and talked about they thought it must have been because of warfare, but the Spanish had already been here. And every time a European ship landed, outbreaks of disease popped out, disease that the people didn't have any immunity to. And sometimes the whole villages disappeared. And the people who died the quickest were the very young and the very old. So you can see what that did to the traditions, because elders were not put aside in these cultures. They were elevated and consulted constantly, and they taught what they knew to the youngest. So that was devastating. Yes, ma'am.
The disease management?
Yeah.
The disease management?
Yeah.
So have they maintained, like when we talk about nature and we talk about, medicine, do they still pass on some of their knowledge in regards to what they did back then? Is it any of that in book form or, I mean?
There's a Cherokee writer who has written about some of that traditional medicine, but in the East, it's been said that the last part of traditional culture to survive was folk medicine, and that there were always people in the communities that knew what to go get and harvest to treat what, whatever. But when the things like smallpox came in, they didn't know what to do. One thing that they did with smallpox was rush and jump into the river, because that was something that was accepted with some other illnesses. And that, according to what I read by a contemporary, drove the illness into them and they soon died. But yeah, a lady from the Waccamaw Siouan was going to give a talk at the Wilmington History Association on traditional medicine. And I knew this lady, Ms. Patrick. And so I went down there for it. Well, the time for her to speak came and passed, and there was a big audience, more people than here. And, people began to get kind of restless. And so the person who was going to moderate said they had just received a call that Ms. Patrick would not be coming, that some people in the community thought she should not come and talk about the traditional medication. So I got up impromptu, gave a discussion about Native American history, and basically saved the day. I can say that's what they told me. But she was a very nice lady, and I said that. I know Miss Patrick, and she's very nice. So they're kind of protective, and they have been burned so many times by writers who have come in there, gotten their confidence, and then published something in the paper that was just totally messed up. And so, some people, and I appreciate these people. When I told them what I wanted to do, there was one lady I met in a grocery store in Pembroke, and she looked at me for a second, and she did like this, and she was real heavy, and her chin was just going back and forth like this. But I appreciate that, because it reminded me, I grew up in North Carolina. I grew up in a black and a white environment. And so the Indian people were very familiar to me, but they were also very different. And it took me a while to see what. One thing I remembered was, when I tell them who I am and what I'm doing, don't look at them, just remove your eyes to the side, because they're going to want to look at you and study you and see if they can get some vibe about you. And this happened over and over, and I saw that it was a cultural thing. So I've learned how to present, and, in a way, in a non-threatening way. And now I'm almost like third cousin 10 times removed. I'm almost like a distant cousin who really isn't related, but I know people every time I go down there. I guess we are kind of running out of time, aren't we? I want to say one more thing. There's an extraordinary monument in eastern North Carolina. It's above Snow Hill. It's the most unusual thing that you will see. You're driving through the cornfields and you see this monument rising up, metal, and it's got an arch, and and when the sun hits it, it just blazes. And then there are low walls. There are 6 seats on each side made in the shape of trees, but they're concrete. And then all around, there's a tree planted right in the middle, and all around it at the base, there are metal reliefs of people's hands. And it was made in cooperation with the Tuscarora tribe of New York and East Carolina's anthropology thing. There's no explanation. Nothing tells you what it is. It's just standing there, and it's like not even half a mile, just a short distance from the site where the Tuscarora were defeated in 16 or 17. They were just totally destroyed. And that's when the majority left North Carolina and went to New York, but a lot of them went to Robeson County and they're still there. But it's such an unusual thing. No explanation. It does have a Tuscarora ward, not Katanuaka, but Neuhuruka, which was the name of it. But nothing tells you what happened there or why it's there. It's just there. People come and leave things like acorn squash. Someone left one of these rattles, cowhorn rattles there. And I just went there yesterday. And I saw that it's almost all gone now. The cowhorn is gone, but the bottom of the part and the stick is still there, but it's all going back into the earth. It's a super spiritual place. But if you ever get a chance, it's just above Snow Hill. Like if you're going to New York or something, just take a little side trip.
Well, I know where Snow Hill is, but is it close to a highway?
Yeah, you can't just stop somebody and ask them, because I went in this ABC store. I thought, surely this guy's going to know. He said, I don't know. I never heard of it. And he wasn't 4 miles away from it. But he made some calls and he said, the person I talked to thinks you take this next right and go up there. But what you do is you come out of Snow Hill on 13 and then you turn off, I can't remember numbers, to go to Wilson. And that's it. And you'll see it coming up. It's really an awesome place. I went up there one time and there was a Native American man there with his little granddaughter. And I've been wanting to see somebody there the whole time that I've been going up there. And so we talked to him. He was from the Coharie tribe. And he said he wanted his little granddaughter to see this. And I told him how I had been to Coharie back in 1777. I mean, I'm getting old, but not that old. 1977. And I met the people there and I named them Carol Brewington, Greg Jacobs. And he said, you know, Miss Carol died. I'm getting a chill right now. And I said, no, what? I meant to bring the thing that she gave me. She was in a car wreck, another car wreck down in Wilmington. And she's like Wayne of the Maharan, just a loss that you just can't believe. But about a year before that, she presented me with this big beaded medallion. She does bead work, yellow, red, black, and white, and said, I want you to have this. She's always been very supportive, asked me how it's coming and everything. And she said, but there's a catch. I want the first copy of your book. And I said, okay. So she died, and I'm dedicating the book to her. So that's the best I can do. So I appreciate it. Thank you, everybody. I've really enjoyed it. Okay.
Great. Thank you, Stan. This has been a great presentation. You've shown us so much, and I know you could go on a much longer if we had the time. So I want to thank everybody here, and once again, if you like what we do, please donate either online or if you're here, donate in the box over there. I appreciate all of you. And our next, well, you've signed in, so our next presentation is going to be on an animal, going to be on bats. And that should be very interesting. We have an expert coming to speak to us. So stay tuned. Thank you all.